The billionaire CEO walked into his own store, but no one recognized him. He was undercover, disguised as a minimum wage employee. What he discovered wasn't just inefficiency, it was evil, systematic wage theft, cruelty, and one manager who targeted his most vulnerable workers. This is the true story of the day the boss became a hero, and how a single recording brought a corrupt empire crashing down.
Have you ever had that feeling? That nagging, itching feeling in the back of your mind that something just isn't right? Even when everyone around you is smiling, even when all the reports and all the numbers say everything is perfect, that feeling that the music is playing too loud. Because if it stopped, you might hear the truth. That's where our story begins, with that feeling. In a skyscraper that practically kissed the clouds, in an office so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat, a man named Arthur Finch was having that feeling. On paper, Arthur had everything. He was a billionaire CEO. His company, ValueMax, was a household name. He had the corner office, the view of Cleveland that looked like a sparkling diorama, the private jet, the suits that cost more than most people's cars. But he was lonely, and he was disconnected. He'd built this empire from the ground up. He'd once known every employee's name. But now, his world was boardrooms and spreadsheets, profit margins and stock prices. Every week, perfect reports would land on his desk, especially from one store, the Cleveland flagship. 100% employee satisfaction, they'd boast. 0 complaints, model efficiency. And that was the problem. It was too perfect. In the real world, people have bad days. They have frustrations. 0 complaints? That's not a sign of perfection. That's a sign of silence. And silence can be the loudest alarm bell of all. So, Arthur Finch made a decision. It wasn't a corporate strategy. It was a gut instinct. He was going to go down to the ground. He was going to see for himself. He didn't tell a soul. He went home, to a closet he hadn't opened in years, and he pulled out a pair of worn jeans, a simple t-shirt, and a faded baseball cap. He looked at himself in the mirror. The billionaire was gone. In his place was just a man he hadn't seen in a long, long time. He gave his reflection a nod. "Okay, Alex," he whispered to himself. "Let's go to work." The next morning, Alex walked into the Cleveland ValueMax. His ValueMax. His first impression was, it was fine. It was bright. It was clean. The shelves were stocked. Customers were buzzing around. It looked like success. It smelled like success, that classic mix of new clothes and popcorn from the food court. But then he started to notice things. The little things you'd never see from the 40th floor. He saw the way a young cashier's smile would instantly vanish the second a customer turned away, replaced by a look of sheer exhaustion. He saw the security guard, standing stiffly, his eyes constantly scanning not for shoplifters, but like he was waiting for a reprimand. And he saw him, the store manager, David Croft, a man in his mid-40s with overly gelled hair and a walk that screamed of someone who enjoyed the little power he had a little too much. Employees would physically tense up when he walked by, like gazelles sensing a lion. Alex, felt a chill. This wasn't a team. This was a kingdom. And King David ruled by fear. He was about to leave, to file this away as a bad vibe, and nothing more when he heard it. It was a sound that stopped him dead in his tracks, right there in the hallway near the employee restrooms. It was the sound of crying. But not just crying. This was something else entirely. This was a raw, guttural, heart-shattering sound. The sound of someone who had been holding it together for so long, and whose world had finally, completely fallen apart. It was a sound of pure despair. It echoed from behind the restroom door, and it made Arthur's blood run cold. Because those 100% satisfaction reports, they suddenly felt like a sick joke. This was the truth. This was a sound his spreadsheets could never quantify. He looked down. Through the crack under the door, a small silver name badge had skittered out onto the wet tile, as if thrown away in a moment of anguish. He bent down and picked it up. Elena Morales, custodial staff. A name, a person, the source of the most painful sound he had ever heard. His CEO instincts kicked in, solved the problem, fixed the issue. But Alex knew better. This wasn't a problem to be fixed. This was a human being to be helped. He took a breath and knocked gently on the door. The sobbing stopped abruptly. He heard a sharp intake of breath, a frantic shuffling, the sound of someone trying desperately to pull themselves together. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft, careful not to scare her. Are you okay in there?" A long pause. Then a voice, choked and thick with tears, trying so hard to sound normal. I'm fine. Just give me a minute." But her voice betrayed her. It was trembling. This wasn't fine. This was a woman on the edge. A moment later, the door creaked open, and the woman who stepped out. I don't think Arthur was ever prepared for what she looked like. She was petite, in her early 40s, but she carried herself like she carried the weight of the world. Her ValueMax uniform was wrinkled and looked like it had been washed too many times. Her eyes were red and puffy, raw from crying, but it was her hands that he couldn't stop staring at. They were cracked and red, rough from harsh chemicals and endless work, and they were shaking. She couldn't stop them. She quickly bent down to grab her name badge from his hand, but her fingers were trembling so badly she could barely grasp it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, refusing to make eye contact. "I shouldn't be. I need to get back to work." "You don't look fine," Arthur said, his voice still gentle. "I'm Mike, by the way. Alex. I'm Alex. Just started here today." He lied, the name feeling foreign. He needed her to see a fellow worker, not a boss. She glanced up at him, and her eyes were so tired. So deeply, profoundly tired. They were the eyes of someone who worked multiple jobs, who got too little sleep, who was running on fumes and fear. She seemed to be assessing him, deciding if he was safe. After a long moment, her shoulders just sagged. All the fight went out of her. What was the point in pretending anymore? "It's just," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything's falling apart." And there, in that fluorescent-lit hallway, with a distant sound of shopping carts and pop music, Elena Morales' story came tumbling out. She told him about her daughter, Isabella, her 8-year-old girl with a laugh that could light up a room and dreams of being a dancer. She told him about the congenital heart condition she was born with, a time bomb in her tiny chest. The doctors had said she needed surgery. Soon. Elena's voice cracked. "And I can't afford it." She'd worked at ValueMax for 5 years. 5 years. Never missed a day. Never been late. She was supposed to get health insurance. That was a promise. But lately, she gestured helplessly toward a bulletin board behind the customer service desk. "Lately, this happens." Arthur followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped. The schedule was a nightmare. A mess of scribbled notes, crossed-out shifts, and last-minute changes. Elena's name was there, but it was sporadic. 1 week, 38 hours. The next, 15. Then back up to 28. Then down to 12. No rhythm. No reason. No consistency. How could anyone budget? How could anyone plan a life? How could you qualify for full-time benefits when your hours were a roller coaster? "They keep cutting my hours," Elena explained, her voice hollow. "Mr. Croft, he says it's corporate policy. But I don't understand. The store is always busy. We're always understaffed. We're all doing the work of 2 or 3 people." Arthur's jaw clenched. He knew the corporate policy on scheduling. He'd written the policy. This wasn't it. This was deliberate. This was manipulation. "And when I asked about the insurance," Elena said, a fresh tear tracing a path through her cheek, "he said I wasn't eligible. He said my hours were too irregular." She said the word like it was a death sentence. And then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "There are others, too. James in electronics. Chloe in cosmetics. We're all having the same problems. But Mr. Croft says if we don't like it, if we complain, plenty of people will be happy to take our jobs." A chill ran down Arthur's spine. David Croft. He remembered the name from the management roster. His file was full of glowing reviews. No red flags. He was, on paper, a model manager. But Arthur was beginning to understand. Croft was a predator. He knew exactly who he could push around. The immigrants. The single mothers. The people who couldn't afford to quit. People like Elena. I need this job, Elena whispered, her voice breaking completely. My daughter, she's only 8. Without the surgery, she couldn't finish the sentence. Arthur watched as she finally managed to pin her name badge back onto her uniform, that small, cheap silver rectangle. It represented everything to her. Her daughter's medical care, their rent, their food, their survival. And David Croft was using that desperation against her. It was the most elegant, cruelest form of control he had ever seen. I should go, Elena said, glancing nervously toward the main floor. My shift ends at 4, but I'm supposed to come back at 6 tomorrow morning for inventory. Mr. Croft scheduled me for a double shift, but she gave a sad, empty laugh. Somehow the system only shows he's paying me for 4 hours of it. As she walked away, Arthur noticed something else. A slight limp, probably from standing on concrete floors for years without the proper anti-fatigue mats. Another corporate policy that was clearly being ignored. Arthur stood alone in that hallway, staring at that chaotic schedule board. He wasn't seeing crossed-out shifts and reduced hours anymore. He was seeing a family choosing between groceries and gas money. He was seeing a mother lying awake at night, calculating medical bills she could never pay. He was seeing a little girl who might not get the chance to dance. He had built ValueMax on a simple principle, that good companies take care of their people. But somewhere in the vast, empty space between his boardroom policies and reality of this fluorescent-lit floor, that principle had been systematically, utterly destroyed. The question was, how deep did this go? And how many other people were suffering right now while he sat in his ivory tower, completely oblivious to their pain? His mission had changed. This was no longer about due diligence. This was a rescue operation. He left the store that evening, his mind racing. He drove his rental car, a modest, nothing sedan, back to the budget hotel he'd booked. In a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant, surrounded by corporate reports that now felt like lies, he began to plan. He pulled up the store's employment records on his laptop. What he found made him physically sick. Over the past year, the store had a 40% turnover rate. 40%. The official reason for almost every departure was voluntary resignation. But Arthur could read between the lines. People don't voluntarily leave jobs in an economy like this. Not like this. They were being driven out, pushed until they broke. And the cruelest irony? David Croft's numbers looked stellar. Labor costs were down. Efficiency ratings were up. On paper, he was a genius. Arthur finally understood the game. Keep employees desperate and scared. Prevent them from working enough hours to qualify for benefits. Make sure anyone who might complain simply disappears. It was a brutal, brilliant, and utterly heartless system. He opened a new browser window. Mike Henderson was gone. He needed a new cover, a deeper cover. He crafted the persona of Alex, a laid-off construction worker. No family, desperate for any work, willing to do anything. The kind of employee David Croft would see as the perfect victim. He practiced in the mirror. It wasn't about acting. It was about remembering. Remembering what it felt like to be desperate, to be hungry, to be afraid. The next morning, he returned to the store in his worn jeans and second-hand work boots. He walked with the slouch of a defeated man. He approached Croft's office with a perfect mixture of desperation and eagerness. "Excuse me, Mr. Croft?" "Sir, I heard you might have some openings. I'm willing to work any shift, any hours you need." Croft looked up from his computer, and Arthur could practically see the calculations running behind his eyes. Another vulnerable soul. Another number to exploit. Experience. Croft barked. Construction, mostly. But that dried up. I need steady work. I'm not picky. Cleaning, stocking, whatever. Croft's smile was predatory. I like that attitude. Tell you what, Alex, I can start you in custodial. Night shift, $12.50 an hour. You'll be working with Maria. Elena. But don't you let her fill your head with a bunch of complaints. She's got a tendency toward drama. The casual cruelty in his voice made Arthur want to reach across the desk and grab him, but he forced himself to nod eagerly. That sounds perfect, sir. Thank you, sir. When do I start? Tonight. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And Alex. Croft leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I reward loyalty and hard work. Employees who understand how things work here do very well. Employees who cause trouble don't. Arthur nodded like he understood perfectly. And he did. He just understood it in a way David Croft could never imagine. That evening, Arthur changed into his work clothes in the store bathroom, transforming himself completely into Alex. He pinned the temporary name tag to his shirt. The cheap plastic felt foreign and heavy after years of wearing tailored suits. When Elena arrived for night shift, she looked surprised to see him. You came back, she said quietly. Told you I needed the job, Arthur replied, giving her a small, tired smile. Guess we're working together. She studied his face for a moment, and he wondered if she sensed something different, something that didn't quite fit. But she just nodded. Stick close to me tonight, she said finally. I'll show you the ropes. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a fearful whisper. And Alex, everything I told you yesterday about being careful around Mr. Croft, double that for the night shift. That's when he does his worst work. The store lights dimmed. The last customers filtered out. The gates were pulled down with a final metallic clang. And the store transformed. What seemed like a normal, busy retail environment during the day revealed its true nature under the harsh, humming glow of the nighttime fluorescence. It felt empty, oppressive. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of freezers in the distance, echoing footsteps of David Croft on his nightly prowl. Arthur followed Elena through her routine, mopping vast, empty aisles, cleaning restrooms that customers had left in a state of disrespect, restocking shelves with a mountain of merchandise. It was backbreaking, thankless work, and within the first hour, he began to see the cracks, the deep, dangerous cracks Croft had created. Elena, he asked, watching her rinse a mop in a bucket that reeked of industrial-strength disinfectant, why are you cleaning the employee break room with the same stuff you use for the bathrooms? She glanced around nervously before answering. Mr. Croft, he cut the cleaning supply budget. Says we're using too much. She held up a nearly empty bottle of floor cleaner. This has to last a whole week, for the entire store. Arthur knew the corporate allocation for cleaning supplies. This store should have had 10 times what he was seeing. Croft was cutting corners, risking people's health, just to make his numbers look a few dollars better. At 1 a.m., Croft made his first appearance. He prowled through the aisles like a wolf, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. He found Elena restocking paper towels in the customer restrooms. Morales, his voice cut through the quiet like a whip. Elena's shoulders tensed, but she kept working. Morales, I'm talking to you. She finally looked up, her face a careful, neutral mask. Yes, Mr. Croft? This floor is still dirty. What exactly have you been doing for the past hour? Arthur watched from behind a display rack. The floor was spotless. He could see his own reflection in the tiles. But Elena simply nodded. I'll go over it again. You better. And next time, maybe try actually working instead of feeling sorry for yourself. The contempt in his voice was palpable. Speaking of which, I need to see you in my office. Now. Arthur felt his hands clench into fists. He forced himself to stay hidden to keep observing. If he intervened now, he'd blow his cover before he understood the full, horrifying scope of the problem. Through the glass partition of the office, he watched a masterclass in psychological destruction. Croft sat. Elena stood. A deliberate power play. With every word Croft spoke, Elena seemed to get smaller. Her posture crumpled. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. James, the electronics clerk, slipped into break room and sat heavily beside Arthur. Poor Elena, he muttered, shaking his head. 3rd time this week he's called her in there. What's he saying to her? Arthur asked. James glanced around nervously. Same thing he says to all of us. That we're lucky to have jobs. That people like us, he paused, choosing his words with care, should be grateful for whatever scraps we get. People like us, you know? Immigrants. Single mothers. People who can't afford to quit. His voice was thick with bitter resignation. Croft knows exactly who he can push around. Through the glass, Arthur saw Croft lean back in his chair, radiating casual cruelty. Then, he did something that made Arthur's vision flash red. He pulled out Elena's timesheet and began making changes with a red pen, right in front of her. He was slashing through her recorded hours, stealing her time right to her face. "He's cutting her time again," James whispered, probably claiming she took unauthorized breaks or something. Last week, he docked Chloe, the one in cosmetics, 2 hours for excessive bathroom usage. "She's pregnant, for God's sake." Arthur reached for his phone, his fingers finding the voice recorder app. Whatever was happening in that office, he needed evidence. Through the thin wall, Croft's voice carried clearly. "Told you before, Morales. If you can't handle the workload without getting emotional, maybe this isn't the right job for you. There are plenty of people who'd be grateful for your position. Please, Mr. Croft." Elena's voice was barely audible. "I just need consistent hours." "My daughter." "Your personal problems are not my concern." Croft snapped. "What concerns me is that you've been talking to other employees about scheduling. That sounds like troublemaking to me." Arthur hit record. "I wasn't making trouble," Elena pleaded. "I was just what? Trying to organize some kind of complaint? Because that would be very, very unfortunate for your employment status here." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Elena fell silent. "Now," Croft said, sounding satisfied, "I'm cutting you back to 20 hours next week. Maybe that'll help you focus on your work instead of stirring up drama. And Morales, if I hear you've been talking to anyone else about scheduling or policies, we'll need to have a discussion about whether you're a good fit for this company at all." Arthur watched Elena nod silently, her dignity stripped away piece by piece. When she finally emerged from the office, her face was pale but composed. She walked past the break room without looking in, her head held high even as her world collapsed around her. But Arthur had seen enough. The phone in his pocket contained Croft's own words. A smoking gun. As Croft returned to his office, whistling a tuneless melody like he hadn't just shattered someone's life, Arthur felt something harden inside him. This wasn't just about Elena anymore. This was about every James, every Chloe, every single person who had been ground down by a petty tyrant with a little bit of power. The time for observation was over. Now, it was time to see just how deep this corruption went. He was going to get the evidence he needed. All of it. And as a long, dark night stretched on, Alex, Finch knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, it would all come crashing down. The rest of that night shift passed in a blur of backbreaking work and cold, simmering rage. Arthur, no, he was Alex now, he had to be Alex, helped Elena finish her mountains of tasks. He watched her limp grow more pronounced, her face grow paler with each passing hour. She was running on nothing but love for her daughter and sheer, stubborn willpower. And David Croft was burning that willpower for fuel. Just after 4 a.m., Croft emerged from his office again, a clipboard in his hand and a smug look on his face. "Morales, Henderson, come here." They gathered in the main aisle, under the harsh lights. Croft consulted his notes with the air of a king holding court. "Corporate's been asking questions about our labor costs," he announced, like he was sharing a secret. "Starting next week, we're implementing some new efficiency measures." He smiled. It was the most chilling thing Arthur had ever seen. Instead of 2 people on night custodial, we're going back to 1. Elena's face went bone white. "Mr. Croft, this is a 40,000 square foot store. 1 person can't." "1 person can and will," he snapped, his smile vanishing. "Elena, since you've been here longer, you keep the position. But you'll need to handle the full workload in the same time frame." Arthur did the math in his head. What they were doing tonight with 2 people was already inhuman. Asking 1 person to do it all was impossible. It was a death sentence. "If you can't handle it," Croft continued, his eyes glinting, "I can always find someone who can." He looked directly at Arthur as he said it. The threat was clear for both of them. After he left, Elena slumped against a checkout counter, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "I can't do this alone," she whispered, her voice thick with tears she was too tired to shed. I can't. But if you complain, Arthur finished softly, you'll lose the job entirely. She just nodded, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a clean line through the dust on her cheek. My daughter's surgery is scheduled for next month. I need this insurance. I have to find a way. It was in that moment, watching this good woman being broken for profit, that Arthur noticed his chance. Croft had left his office door slightly ajar, and through the gap, Arthur could see him at his computer, typing rapidly, a look of intense concentration on his face. "Elena," Arthur said, his voice low, "can you handle the East Wing by yourself for a few minutes? I want to check something." She looked confused, exhausted, but she nodded. "Be careful, Alex. If he catches you snooping." He didn't need to be told twice. He moved silently as a ghost toward the office. The hallway was dim, the only light spilling from the crack in Croft's door. Arthur positioned himself just to the side, hidden in shadow, and pulled out his phone. Through the gap, he could see Croft's computer screen clearly, and what he saw made the breath catch in his throat. Croft was logged into the employee scheduling system, but he wasn't just looking at it. His fingers were flying across the keyboard, systematically reducing hours for multiple employees. Elena, James, Chloe, Sarah, slashing their time, cutting their pay. But then Arthur saw it. The crime. Croft wasn't just cutting the hours. He was reassigning them. He was typing in an employee ID number, B. Miller Jr., and transferring the slashed hours to that account. A phantom employee, a ghost on the payroll. Every hour he stole from Elena, from James, from all of them, was going directly into an account he controlled. He was stealing their wages. Right there, in black and white. Arthur's hands trembled with rage, so pure he had to steady himself against the wall. He hit record on his phone, capturing the entire screen. But it got worse. So much worse. Croft closed the scheduling system and opened another program, the health insurance enrollment portal. He pulled up a file. Elena's file. Her employment status was listed as full-time eligible. With a few clicks, Croft changed it. He clicked a drop-down menu and selected part-time/temporary. He clicked save. With a few keystrokes, he had just officially, systematically denied Elena Morales the health insurance that could save her daughter's life. Arthur felt a white-hot fire explode behind his eyes. He wanted to kick that door down. He wanted to drag Croft out by his collar and show everyone what he really was. But he didn't. He forced himself to keep recording, to document every click, every theft, every casual act of evil. This was bigger than a confrontation. This was evidence for a federal case. At 6 a.m., Croft emerged from his office, looking immensely pleased with himself. "Henderson, I need you to move all the pallets from the back room to the sales floor, by yourself." Arthur looked at the mountain of boxes in the stockroom. It was a 4-person job, easily. All of them. Arthur asked, playing his part, "Problem with that?" Croft sneered. "Because I can always call someone who won't give me attitude." "No problem," Arthur said through gritted teeth. For the next hour, he moved hundreds of pounds of merchandise alone. His back screamed in protest. His hands grew raw. But with every box he lifted, his resolve hardened. He wasn't just moving stock. He was gathering strength. He was understanding in his bones the physical toll that Croft's exploitation was taking on his people. This wasn't about money for Croft. Not really. It was about power. The sick, twisted joy of watching people struggle, of holding their lives in your hands and squeezing just to see how much they could take. By 7 a.m., as the sun began to lighten the sky outside, Arthur was exhausted, sore, and filled with a cold, clear purpose. He had everything he needed. Recordings, photos, digital evidence of wage theft, benefit fraud, unsafe conditions, a masterclass in corruption. He watched Elena hobble to her ancient car, knowing she'd be back in a few short hours to face it all again. He got into his own rental car, the evidence burning a hole in his pocket. The smoking gun was loaded. Now it was time to fire. He didn't sleep. He went back to his hotel room and made calls. To his head of HR, Rebecca Chun, a woman he trusted implicitly. To security. To legal. By 10 a.m., he had a comprehensive file ready, a case that would destroy David Croft. At 2 p.m., Arthur returned to the ValueMax as Alex one last time. He found Elena in the break room, trying to force down a dry peanut butter sandwich. She looked nauseous with exhaustion. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, his concern genuine. "Just need to get through today," she whispered, her eyes hollow. "Sophia's surgery got moved up to next week. I can't afford to miss any more hours." Arthur felt his heart clench. Next week. The clock wasn't just ticking. It was screaming. He nodded, saying nothing. But inside, he was screaming too. Just hold on. Just a little longer. At 3 p.m. sharp, Croft gathered the afternoon shift for a mandatory meeting. About 20 employees stood in a semicircle near customer service. Elena, James, Chloe, her pregnant belly now unmistakable, and all the others. Their faces were a mixture of boredom and dread. They expected more bad news. They were never disappointed. "All right, people, listen up," Croft announced, his voice dripping with unearned authority. "Corporate's breathing down our necks about inventory accuracy. So we're implementing some new procedures." He held up a clipboard thick with forms. "From now on, any discrepancies come out of your paycheck. Lost merchandise, miscounts, damaged goods, it all gets deducted from your wages." A wave of uneasy murmuring went through the group. This was blatantly illegal. They all knew it. But who would they tell? The man making the rules was the one breaking them. "I know some of you might think this is unfair," Croft continued, his eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk until they landed on Elena. "But maybe if certain people paid more attention to their work instead of worrying about personal problems, we wouldn't need these measures." The direct, public attack was a final straw. The air left the room. That's when Arthur stepped forward from the back of the group. "Actually, David," he said, his voice calm but clear, cutting through the tension, "I think there's something unfair here. But it's not what you think." Every head turned. Croft's eyes narrowed, confused and irritated. "Alex," he said the name like a curse. "You got something to say?" "Yeah," Arthur said, pulling out his phone. "I do. I've got quite a lot to say, actually." He tapped the screen, and then David Croft's own voice, crisp and clear, filled the silent store. "Yeah, I got your numbers for this week. Santos is down to 20 hours. Chen's at 15. The pregnant one, Sarah, I'm putting her on inventory duty. That'll make her quit within a month. No complaints filed. They're too scared to go to corporate. I've made sure of that." The effect was electric. Employees looked at each other, then at Croft, their eyes wide with shock. Croft's face went from smug confidence to pale, panicked shock in a nanosecond. "What the hell is this?" he sputtered, taking a step back. "You recorded me illegally. That's—" "Actually, Ohio is a one-party consent state," Arthur said, his voice still eerily calm. "Perfectly legal." He took a step closer. "But wage theft? Benefit fraud? Conspiracy to defraud? Those are federal crimes, David." Croft's eyes darted around the circle of employees, all of whom were now looking at him with pure, undiluted hatred. He was cornered. "You don't know who you're messing with, Henderson," he blustered, a desperate, last-ditch effort. "I'll have you arrested for what?" Arthur asked, his voice dropping, letting a sliver of his true authority show. "Exposing the truth?" Then he reached into his other pocket and pulled out the one thing that would make David Croft's blood drain from his face entirely. A small, elegant, gold CEO badge. He held it up. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the hum of the freezers, the distant beep of a register, the sharp intake of 20 breaths. "My name isn't Alex Henderson," Arthur said, his voice now carrying the weight and power of the man he truly was. It rang across the sales floor. "I'm Arthur Finch. I own this company." He locked eyes with Croft. "And you are finished." The explosion of reactions was immediate. Gasps, whispers, hands flying to mouths. Elena stared, her mind visibly struggling to process the impossible. The kind janitor, Alex, was a billionaire CEO. Croft's face cycled through shock, fear, and finally, desperate, sputtering anger. "You can't do this. I've got rights. I've got a contract. You had a contract, Arthur corrected, his voice like ice. Fraud voids all employment agreements. He turned toward the store entrance. Security. 2 ValueMax security officers, who had been positioned outside since that morning, entered and approached Croft. David Croft, you're terminated effective immediately, Arthur announced for all to hear. You're also under investigation for wage theft, benefit fraud, and conspiracy. These officers will escort you from the premises. As security moved in, Croft made one last, pathetic play. You can't prove anything. It's their word against mine. He pointed a shaking finger at the employees. Who's going to believe a bunch of careless? I've got your own recorded confession. Arthur cut him off, his voice sharp and final. I've got computer logs showing every illegal transaction. I've got photographic evidence of every violation. He stepped so close to Croft they were almost nose to nose, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper only the inner circle could hear. And I've got something else, David. I've got power. Real power. The kind you've only ever pretended to have. Croft's shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him. He was just a sad, small man in a cheap suit. As the security officers took him by the arms and led him away, past the checkout lanes he'd terrorized, past the employees he'd abused, he muttered one last time, "This isn't over." Arthur watched him go, then turned to the stunned, silent employees. "Yes," he said softly, to everyone and no one. "It is." The silence after Croft's departure was heavy, filled with confusion, disbelief, and a fragile, trembling hope. Elena was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. You're really the owner?" "I am," Arthur said, and then he did the most important thing he would do all day. He looked each and every one of them in the eye. "And I owe all of you the deepest, most sincere apology. I built this company on the principle that we take care of our people. But I failed you. I got so focused on numbers in a boardroom that I lost sight of the people on the floor. I am so sorry." The simple words, spoken with genuine remorse, began to break the ice. James, still clutching his inventory clipboard, stepped forward tentatively. "So what happens now? Are we all getting fired for talking to you?" The question hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. These people were so conditioned to fear retaliation that even their liberation looked like a threat. "Nobody is getting fired," Arthur said, his voice firm and clear. "In fact, we're going to fix everything. Starting right now." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Rebecca, we're ready." Within minutes, Rebecca Chun, the head of HR, arrived with a team of 3 specialists carrying laptops and boxes of documents. They transformed the cluttered break room into an emergency command center. "Elena Morales," Rebecca called out, consulting her tablet. "You've been here 5 years, correct?" Elena, still looking shell-shocked, just nodded. "According to the records, you're classified as part-time, temporary. No benefits." Rebecca's fingers flew across the keyboard. "But your actual hours worked show you've been full-time for 18 months straight. As of right now, you are classified as a full-time, permanent employee of ValueMax. Your health, dental, and vision coverage are active, retroactive to your original hire date." Elena's knees buckled. Arthur reached out and caught her arm as tears streamed down her face. "My daughter," she choked out. "Her surgery is fully covered," Rebecca said, her professional demeanor softening with a warm smile. "Pre-authorization is being processed as we speak. The hospital will be notified within the hour." The sound that escaped Elena's throat was half sob, half laugh, half prayer of thanks. It was the sound of a crushing weight, borne for years, finally being lifted. "And Elena," Rebecca added, "our preliminary audit shows you are owed $8,400 in stolen wages and unpaid overtime. A check will be cut for you today." Around the room, similar conversations were happening. Back pay, benefits, apologies. The healing had begun. But Arthur wasn't finished. "Everyone," he said, calling their attention. "This can never happen again. So we're changing how things work." He turned to Chloe. "Chloe, how far along are you?" 7 months, she said quietly, a protective hand on her belly. Effective immediately, you are on paid administrative leave until after your maternity leave ends. Full salary, full benefits, and a guaranteed position when you're ready to return. Chloe's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes flooding with tears of relief. He turned to James. James, you mentioned wanting to move into management. How would you feel about assistant store manager? James's clipboard clattered to the floor. Sir, I don't have a college degree. You have something better, Arthur said. You know every inch of this store, and you care about the people who work here. That's what I need. Then he saved the biggest for last. He turned to Elena. Elena, I have an offer for you. She looked up at him, her eyes still red, but now shining with a hope he hadn't seen before. I'm offering you the store manager position. The silence was absolute. Even Rebecca's team stopped typing. Sir, Elena stammered. I clean floors. I don't know how to run a store. You know how to work harder than anyone should have to, Arthur said, his voice growing stronger. You know how to care about people even when you're being mistreated. You know every challenge these employees face, because you've lived them. Elena, you've been managing your own impossible situation for years. Managing this store will be easy by comparison. But I don't have experience. I'll provide it. Full management training, business courses, whatever you need. Starting salary is $85,000 plus benefits, plus performance bonuses that are tied to employee satisfaction, not just profit margins. Elena stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. 85,000? That's just a start, he smiled. Good managers who take care of their people get promoted. Those jobs pay six figures. He then made one last announcement. One more thing. We're implementing an employee council at every ValueMax. You will elect representatives who have direct access to corporate leadership. No retaliation. No intimidation. If something like this ever starts to happen again, you have a direct line to stop it. He pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to Elena. This has my personal cell phone number on it. Not my assistant's. Mine. If anyone, a manager, a regional director, even another CEO, ever treats you or your team the way Croft did, you call me. Immediately. The transformation in the room was palpable. The fear was melting away, replaced by a dawning sense of ownership and hope. Later that evening, as the sun set over Cleveland, painting the sky in oranges and purples, Arthur stood by his car. The store looked the same from the outside, but inside, everything had changed. Elena walked out, not with her head down, but standing tall. She had her first manager's training manual under her arm. Thank you, she said, her voice steady for the first time since he'd met her. Not just for the job or the money, but for seeing us as people. Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. Thank you, he said, for reminding me what my job actually is. Weeks later, he returned for a visit. The sound that greeted him wasn't silence or sobbing. It was laughter. Real, honest laughter coming from the break room. Elena was at her new desk, dressed in a sharp blazer, confidently leading a meeting. On the wall was a chart showing employee satisfaction scores. They had skyrocketed from the abysmal to the exceptional. How's Isabella? Arthur asked. Elena's entire face lit up. She had the surgery. The doctor said it was a perfect success. She's going to be able to run and play. She wants to meet you. She calls you the man who saved Mommy's job. Arthur smiled, a deep, genuine warmth spreading through him. I'd like that very much. Then Elena grew serious. She pulled out a folder. Arthur, I've been talking to people. Managers at other stores, not just ours. What Croft was doing, it's not that uncommon. The wage theft, the fear, it's like there's a playbook. She opened the folder. It was filled with notes, stories from workers across the retail industry. I think ValueMax could lead a change. Not just fix our own problems, but set a standard. And so, the Worker-Verified Fair Employment certification was born, a seal of approval given not by executives, but by the employees themselves. Months later, Arthur stood on a massive stage at a national retail conference. The title of his keynote address was simple: Leadership from the Ground Up, Last year, he began, I thought I was running a successful company. And he told them the whole story. The crying in the bathroom, the name badge, the fear, the night shift. He told them about Elena, about Isabella, about David Croft. He didn't hide his failure. He led with it. He showed them the results. Profits were up. Customer loyalty was up. Because when you treat people right, everything else follows. We've proven that doing right by your employees isn't just morally correct, he told a rapt audience. It's profitable. After the speech, a young executive approached him, looking ashamed and inspired. Mr. Finch, I think we have some of those problems at my company. Where do I start? Arthur didn't hand him a business textbook. He handed him Elena Morales' card. Start by listening, he said, really listening. And when you hear something you don't like, don't explain it away. Fix it. That night, Arthur stood at his office window, looking out at the Cleveland skyline. Somewhere out there, in other stores and warehouses, there were other Elenas. But now he knew. There were also other leaders who had heard his story and were starting to listen. Change was spreading one workplace at a time. And it had all started with a simple question, asked in a quiet hallway by a man who was brave enough to care about the answer. Are you okay?